Good morning, everybody. Good to have you all here. I'm trusting you can see me out there in the ether. My name is Mike Scott. I'm the program director here. And you are joining us with Paul Oman to Painting the Winter Landscape. Paul will be teaching watercolor painting this morning. Our mission at Farm Table is to build local food culture, but part of that, of course, is to build community, the community of people that support local farms and local foods. And so we have an art gallery as part of what we do. And it's kind of nice here. You can look in the chat box. Hiya, I live in a farming community in West Wales, UK. And we have someone from Toronto here. But Paul Oman is a local artist, quite well known for his paintings, both here and around the country. Paul, feel free to please say more about yourself if you like, and welcome everybody. We're glad you're here.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much, Mike. It's so great to have all of you here with me today, and I'm excited to do a landscape painting for you. But I love to paint and I love to share painting, and I'm glad to share it with you today. This is going to be a demonstration, so if you've planned on painting along, you can certainly try to do that if you want. But in 90 minutes, I don't have time to stop as I would during a workshop. So I'll try and explain as best as I can as we go. Let's switch over, Mike, to the other view. And what I'm going to do throughout the workshop or throughout this demonstration is to hold up and to show you what I will be doing. And so I did a quick value sketch. So in watercolor, we do not use white paint, although there is white paint that can be used. And sometimes I use it as a touch-up for certain highlights. But generally, we work from light to dark. So our lightest values or colors, we have to remember right when we begin the painting so we don't cover that over. And then we move to our middle values. And finally, at the end, we put the darks in, the darkest colors and values. And this is simply how to approach a watercolor painting, to pull it all together. I started out with a little sketch of where I wanted to go with this morning. And it's all based on a picture I took just a couple days ago at a landscape area nearby where I live. So there was this stream that was running through the forest, and I thought it made for kind of an interesting composition. And the stream, there's actually a secondary stream that comes in here, and so they join together. And I'll try and depict that quickly as I lay this out here in the painting. Okay, and as far as my materials, you can see this is what I'll be painting on, and I do have a very light sketch already put on here on this piece of watercolor paper. I'm using Arches 140-pound cold press paper for this demonstration. I like Arches. It has a tough surface. You can work it hard. There are times that I prefer other papers that are softer, especially if I'm painting and the paper is vertical. The softer paper makes the water and the paint flow more slowly. But generally, I really like Arches. It's a paper that's made in France. And I very lightly put my sketch on there in pencil. I don't push too hard. If I do, then you'll have dents in the paper, and then the paint will fill in those little grooves, and you will have dark lines that you can't get rid of. So with that, we are ready to start painting. And I start out with as big of a brush as possible. I could even go bigger than this, but this is a 2-inch flat brush. So a flat is wider one direction than it is the other. If I turn it like this, you can see it's very narrow, so known as a flat. And it's designed to cover big areas as such. So if it's hard to see what I'm painting when I'm going, I am going to hold this up between each step so you can see more clearly what's going on. Okay, so one way I like to teach and to think about doing a painting is to think in terms of 3 basic values. That is lightness or darkness. So my number 1 is my lightest, which would be what I've left white on this value sketch. The edge of the birch trees, the sky, some of the snow. Number 2 would be the middle values, kind of the in-between white and black. Gray, for instance, would be the number 2 values. And of course, we're going to put all of this in color. And the number 3 would be the darkest darks. You can become more complex with this by having a value scale that has 9 or 10 or 12 numbers or values to it. And that is really what you do as you continue on. But this simplifies it. 1, 2, 3. So the first thing I'm going to do is paint my number 1 values. And I'm going to cover this entire paper with water, except the parts I want to leave completely white. I will leave that as dry paper and go around that. And then I'm going to put a very light color on there. And this first step is known as painting a wash. So you'll see here, my arm's in the way a little bit. You'll see here that I have water. I've got a couple of containers of water. I keep 2 containers so one can be clean in case I need clean water. The other container is going to get dirty very quickly. I have my palette with the paint. Most of the paint I use is Winsor & Newton watercolor paint, a professional grade paint, but I do try other varieties or other brands as well. And there are benefits and drawbacks to each, so test out different things. And I have a sponge right here. If my brush is very wet, like I just dipped it in there, I can touch the brush to the sponge. It will pull a little bit of that extra water off the end of the brush, and it gives me just the right amount of water I need. And you just learn by practicing how much water is on your brush or not. And then, of course, we have the layout of the palette. So I have my yellows over here, the reds are over here, and the blues are over here, basically. And I have a few other colors mixed in here. I'll hold this up a little bit closer. And you can see I have some earth tones over here, raw umber, burnt sienna, cadmium orange. I've got a variety of yellows, lemon yellow, cadmium yellow, Winsor yellow, areolan, raw sienna, yellow ochre, quinacridone gold. This is brown madder, cadmium red. I have quinacridone red, permanent rose. I have some opera in there also. Alizarin crimson, it's a nice deep red. This I think is Prussian blue. I don't use it very much. French ultramarine blue. And I have cobalt blue, cerulean blue, cobalt turquoise. This is permanent sap green and Payne's gray. And I will also just experiment with other colors into my palette. But you'll notice I don't use all of these colors for the painting, just a few. So to simplify this a little bit, instead of wetting the whole paper, what I'm going to do for you is I'm just going to take this number 1 value, the lightest color, and mix that up. I'm using a little yellow, a little bit of the red. I'm using some quinacridone red and lemon yellow. And let's just lay this in where all the light areas are on my painting. In fact, anywhere that's light will be anywhere that's darker than this lightest number 1 value, you can go over the top of it with this layer of paint, because it will be darker. Now it'll be darker in the end and it'll cover it over. So I can basically cover over everything, including the back edges of these birch trees. Let's see if you can see a little bit of how I'm doing this here as I go. And it will all work out well in the end. And it dries lighter than you painted on there. Now, this little drip of water of paint that ran here, I can't leave that sit there too long. I've got to cover that over, or it will dry to the paper, and then I'll have a problem. I can't soften that edge later on. So I'm pulling this color down between my trees here, saving the white edge. And snow, even though snow is generally white, it is very seldom white. When you look at it, if you really study it, there's always some color within it. So I'm gonna go right over this snow here, lighten it up a little bit with more water by diluting this. And come back over here. We will bring this in. Add a little more of the red. Now you could be using alizarin crimson here instead of quinacridone red. I'm just basically using primary colors, reds, yellows, and then I'll add some blue to this in a second. And when they intermingle and mix, they break the primaries and they form the secondary colors, the greens, the oranges, and the lavenders, the purples.
So we're painting everything except the white where the trees are?
That's correct. I'm painting over everything right now, except the very whitest whites, which would be the highlit edges of the birch trees. And at least that's what I've decided to go with here. This is going to be a pine tree over here, but the sun is still going to shine on there, so I'll leave it pretty light. Okay, so this is called a wash, and we're done with step one. And it's more colorful than it appears. It looks kind of gray in the screen here, but it's quite vibrant. One thing I might do, I've only added yellow and red. I would pick up a little bit. Let's take some cobalt blue, and in a few places where it'll be shadowed, I'm going to just merge some of this in, very diluted, and let that overlap in here.
So Paul, it looks like the reddish color you added more on the top. Is that because it's going to have a little sky color in there and you didn't add red down by the ground?
The reason I added it here is because behind these birch trees, I'm going to have a forest of trees, and the red, it just will add some kind of a glowing effect back there into the forest. So if you keep that in mind as I go, you'll see that this will become much darker behind the birch trees over there. And the sun, I want the sun, if we refer to our value sketch here, see it'll be much darker back here. So I added a lot of the red right in through here. And I'm going to have the sun shining from this direction, and it's going to light up the trees that are behind these foreground trees that are in shadow. So this will feel warm over here, but there'll be lots of cool shadows around the stream. That's the feeling or the goal of the painting here. All right, I've taped my paper down. I don't always do that, but for the sake of the demonstration, it keeps the paper more flat. So, and I've taped it onto a board. This is called gator board. It's impermeable, so the water doesn't soak into it. You could tape it onto a piece of plywood, that's fine. Even though plywoods will soak up some water, it all works fine. And then you just simply have to let it dry. Now, I typically do not use a hair dryer to speed up the process because something is going on right now, and it's called sedimentation, or granulation is another name. I don't know if you can see it on here, but there are variations in the pigments as they settle into the little divots in the paper, the rough valleys, and it creates this atmospheric appearance. If you use a hairdryer to dry it too quickly, it'll take some of that away and you lose that nice effect. However, to speed it up for the demonstration's sake, I need to get it dried quickly so we can go to the next step. So I am going to do that. I'm just going to use a hairdryer and dry it here.
Can you put the picture so we can see what the picture looks like of the values?
Hold it up.
So the other one, the value one, so original.
Oh, the value. You want to see the value?
Can you
Yeah.
be setting up somewhere there so we can kind of judge by what you're doing?
I didn't quite get that, but do you want to see this all the while I'm painting this? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that would be great. Thank you.
Is that helpful right there?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's so important to have that in your mind and in view the whole time, because you're always referring to that. So the goal with the landscape here, if you take a picture like this out in the woods, there are thousands, millions of branches and trees everywhere. And your goal is to paint as few trees as possible but to still make it believable that it's an entire forest of trees. That is really what you're after. And another word for that is simplification. You really need to simplify everything into big shapes. So the next shape I am going to work with is everything back here. It's actually the middle values, the number 2s, which is all of this. Everything that's connected together as a middle value will be one big shape through here. But if you want to simplify that shape a little bit more and not think of it as one huge shape, in your mind, you might just at least think of, all right, all the trees back here are one shape. The land back here, no matter how far away or close it is, one shape. But the more I've painted, the more I think of this, everything in here is one connected shape, including the shadows up here. And that's probably how I'll paint it today, is I'll just keep connecting everything. And the light starts to appear very quickly once you start laying these shadows in there. It's very fun. So now you know about how dark this should be. You have to choose what colors you're going to use and get them to be about that darkness and place that on here in order to create this illusion that will appear to be three-dimensional on this flat surface of the paper. Does that make sense? Are there
Can
any
you say
other
that
questions?
again, Paul?
Say that again?
Yeah.
Yeah, so anytime you're doing two-dimensional art, like on a flat surface, and you're trying to make it look three-dimensional, you are always creating an illusion to the viewer's eyes or mind. And the way to do that is to use your values, your lights and your darks, to your advantage. Generally speaking, the farther away an object is, the lighter it will be. And the closer it is, the darker it can be. That's not always true either, because look at the white edge of the birch tree. What you have up close is usually greater contrast between the really light lights and the very dark darks. That'll bring it forward to your eye. So, any other questions?
Yes, what yellow did you use?
What yellow? I used a little bit of lemon yellow for this. And you know, I don't use lemon yellow very much, but I wanted a very soft yellow for this early morning scene that I'm painting.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
How long would you usually need to let the paint or the wash dry if you weren't drying?
It depends how much you soak the paper, but it can take, you know, anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour, I would guess, because it was pretty wet. And it's still, I can feel the paper still very cool in the foreground, which means there's water still being held within it. It's a little bit dangerous to paint there. I dried this first up here because I know I'm going to work up here right now. Okay.
Hello there, I have one question. I'm sorry I joined a little late. So I have understood what you said like in last 5 minutes, that how to create a three-dimension look in the two-dimension painting. However, can you please repeat the starting point of this painting for me, just for I have a blank canvas right now. So
yeah, so the starting point,
thank you.
the starting point is you draw your sketch on there. And once you get the sketch drawn on there, I usually work out a black and white before I start, so I know where I'm going. You don't have to do that. But then you paint your lightest colors, your lightest values.
Okay.
And if you want to save any paper as white paper, just pure white, you have to go around it.
Okay. So basically I have to draw the sketch of the trees or the wood or any kind of object that we are having in the painting. And I have to draw the surrounding area. Like I have to paint the surrounding area with the lightest paint that I have. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
And we have to leave the sketched area, like we don't have to paint it. We have to keep it hollow, right?
Oh, yes, leave your whites. Don't cover those.
Right. Right. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So once I get going, it's a demonstration, so I need to keep moving here. So I've used some cobalt blue, and you can use any blue for this, but I've mixed up a middle value. So it's not light and it's not dark. It's somewhere in between. And to make it a little bit gray, I just stir into the yellow and red that's in my palette. And I'm gonna lay that down back here where these distant trees are, just to create that shape of the trees and the hills back there. But I don't want to cover over this light edge of this tree right here. So I'm going to come up to that. It looks gray on the video. It's blue, actually, a light grayish blue. And then let's suggest there's a few trees sticking out of the hills back here, like this. We'll bring that right up here. And it's going to be sunlit over here. I don't want to cover that over, but I want to build a darker background behind my birch trees now, so they'll stand out. So we'll just simply begin that. And I don't want to paint any individual trees here. I'm just painting a big block of middle value. And these trees will go up and off the top of the paper here, the forest.
What did you add to the cobalt blue to make it darker?
Well, it looks gray on the painting there. It's really blue on my palette, but to gray anything down, gray is a combination of yellow, red, and blue in various proportions. So you just simply add a little bit of yellow and red to it. And I've just used some of the yellow and red that was already on my palette from mixing the background wash. Okay, so it'll be, that there creates a big shape. I'm going to connect this shape all the way around in through here. You see on my sketch here, oh, it's all connected together, because there'll be a tree up in front here that's going to link the foreground to the background. So let's connect a few trunks of trees that will go right through there. And I'm going to have the stream, it'll be going right here. The stream will end up being darker in the end, so I can go over that with this middle value. It won't hurt a thing. Okay, and the stream will be here. If any of you are familiar with the area where I live, this stream runs right through the cross-country ski trails of our area, and it's just a beautiful place to go. All right, so now I'm laying in this middle values, and I'm just kind of changing the hue of the blue as I go. A little more violet, a little more blue, a little more gray. It just depends. If you keep changing it, it makes the painting much more interesting rather than keeping it the same. So and this is the part of a watercolor that's easy to get very frustrated on and to give up, because it looks like a mess. And it needs to be kind of messy at this point. Okay, so we got that in there. And there will be, since the sunlight's going to be shining this way, across over here, it'll cast shadows. See, the shadows will be cast down over the snow here. Let's use the shapes that we've already created and just connect them right into some of our shadows here like this. We're going to link everything together, including shadows that will come right off of our foreground birch trees. Come through here like so. Shadow there. I want about 3/4 of the snow in shadow, and that makes the sunlight seem a lot brighter. So at least 3/4, maybe even 80 or 85% in shadow. And you will see that as we go. The more I cover up, the brighter the areas that are left will appear to be. Like that. All right, now, while there'll be a shadow on this tree here. I'm going to have a couple more trees in there. I'll just connect. This is going to be lit up pretty well with the sun there. While this is still wet, if it starts to dry a little bit, I have a spray bottle with water in it, and I lightly mist the area that's a little bit dry, just slightly too dry, and it maintains a moisture that I can still work with. If it gets a little bit too dry, that becomes the time you cannot go in there with watercolor or you will ruin your painting. And that is where people say, that's why people say watercolor is so difficult. It's usually right here at this stage that everything will go bad. So, but while it's wet, I'm gonna have this, I'm gonna add different colors now into my forest while it is wet. And you're under pressure in watercolor because the timing is, here I'll add some warm burnt sienna mixed into the cobalt blue background. That'll suggest some light and warmth back in there. And I want to suggest that there are some pine trees that are just emerging out of the forest. So I mix up a real muddy green, and that'll keep the pine tree appearing like it's back there a ways. Like so, I'll generally get the shape, but it's wet, so it blurs. It blurs it out. But I want this pine tree here to reflect down in the stream. That's kind of a nice point of land. And that reflection, the reflections will go straight down. Even if the water's wavy or ripply, if there is a reflection to be seen, it goes straight down with whatever's above it. Like so. I'm going to darken this tree just a touch there. Like so. We could suggest slight variations in value in a couple of spots back here to make it a little more interesting. Like that. Then let's pick up some raw sienna, which is a brighter family of yellow colors. I'm just trying to vary the color, but still work in the middle value family. And it will make the picture more interesting. Like so. Then I'm going to come over here where I'm going to have the sunlight shining on the trees, and just drop some of this in here and just let it do its thing a little bit. So notice I'm painting big shapes. I'm not painting individual trees or branches. I'll do a few of those at the very end, but that's it. And in this particular stream, there are cattails along the edge, and they're kind of half buried in the snow. It's very beautiful. So some of these will be in the sunlight here, so I'll make those a little brighter. Maybe there's a few here. That's all good. I'll just put a little sunlight up there on the top. Then I'm gonna clean out my brush because it was getting quite muddy with lots of color. I'm gonna switch to a different brush. I've been using this wide brush for most of the time so far. I'm gonna switch to one that's not quite as wide. In fact, this brush is called a rake. If you can see it up close, you see how the ends are frayed? It comes that way, they're split. And it allows me to pick up some color. It allows me to do lots of different things, but this is one of them. I can pick up color and it'll make it look like branches by, I'll hold this up closer for you. You can see that. It skips over little gaps. And it kind of gives the illusion of some branches there. Okay, I'm gonna go in here and intensify some of this burnt sienna. It's a rusty color. It really warms it up. So another thing I'm keeping in mind is this, what do you call it? It's setting opposites against each other. Warm colors against cool colors. So the cool colors are your blues and your greens. And your warm colors are your yellows and reds and browns, earth tones. And when you have those things working together, it makes for a very vibrant feeling picture, painting. That's what I want here. This is still all nice and wet. I'm gonna add some alizarin crimson just to intensify some reds in here, a few places. It's all just background. So the dark, let's intensify our reflection. There we go. That's kind of nice in the water. Like this. There, now it's starting to look like reflected water. The more you paint, the more you'll learn the properties of different pigments, and they each do their own thing. Some pigments will cut down through other paint when it's wet. One of those colors is cerulean blue, which is, it is a semi-opaque color. And so I'm mixing it up with a skinny flat brush. It's a flat, and that cerulean blue, I can just shove that right into the wet paint and it will push its way through. I don't know if you can see that there. Hard to see. It will push its way through and open up. It doesn't show up on the video. It'll open up a little pathway and it will look like trees in the forest that are in shadow at a distance. So we'll see if it shows later. Okay, I'm gonna just leave the birch trees till the end here for the most part. Because when you do a painting, you have to figure out what's gonna be your central focal point. You know, what is the main actor or actress on the stage, center stage? And for me, it's these trees supported by the stream right behind it. This is the focal point right here, and then it leads back here. The rest of it just has to play a role to support the main actor on stage. So I don't want to add too much detail to the rest of the things around here, or they will compete with the performer on center stage. And you don't want that to happen, because then your painting becomes distracting, too busy, and eventually people just will turn away from it because there's something about it that doesn't work. So you try and keep it simple. So before I start, I'm gonna just let this dry a bit. I'm gonna work over here with some blurred branches and trees while it's still kind of wet. And I'm gonna do this mostly in the gray colors. So I'll just take a blue, a red, and a little bit of yellow on my palette. And I've got this long skinny brush. Sometimes they're called a liner, L-I-N-E-R, or a rigger, or a script brush. This here is actually got a name. It's called Scroggy's Loose Goose, and it's from Cheap Joe's Art Materials. And somebody created this thing. It just wobbles everywhere like this, so you don't have very much control, which is really great. It helps your painting look better. So let's just suggest there'll be a lot of branches and things in here. Maybe we'll have a few coming out of the top. The paper's dry up here, so I can make these clear lines that appear. See that? There we go. Some lines will appear like branches coming out of the forest. There's going to be some branches coming off of this tree I will enhance here in a little bit also. Like that. Okay.
So Paul, you said that earlier it was important for the painting to still be wet, but then you just said there's a little bit of dry spots there. So you want some to be dry to paint over it?
Right. So this area is wet down here. And as I paint through here, the line I put down blurs out, it bleeds outward. And it makes it appear as though there's atmosphere between that object and your eye. So it appears farther back, and it merges it all together into one shape, which is what I want. But up here, the sky is already dry since we did that first and then dried it. And as the branches come out of the top of the forest, in this case anyway, they'll be real clear. And that will make them appear as though they're closer to you in the scene, in the painting. So what I'm doing here is called wet on dry in watercolor. So I'm painting this big wet area on dry paper. So we did a wash, wet on dry. We've done wet in wet, which is what this was. That's the third technique of watercolor, putting wet paint into wet paint. And if you want to put wet paint in there and not have it move very much, you just have the pigment on your brush very thick, and it'll create a beautiful effect. It doesn't move a whole lot, but it will still be soft. There'll be a little bit of a blurredness to it. The fourth technique is known as dry brush, and we'll get to just a little bit of that at the very end. It comes at the end of the painting. All right, and now while this is wet here and dry there, this is going to be a pine tree, and I'm going to add some color, some darkness to the trunk of this tree. And I want the trunk of it to blur into the background a bit, but then kind of reappear. And you will hear artists call this lost and found edges. So I'm going to just take a blue, some cobalt blue, and some burnt sienna. So burnt sienna functions like an orange, which is red and yellow. And you mix it with blue. Now you've got yellow, red, and blue, your three primaries. They come together and it turns gray. So, and I've kept more burnt sienna in here than I have blue, so it's a brown gray. It'll appear more brownish than gray. And I can vary the darkness of it by how much water I have on my brush. So I'm gonna soften this as it goes up into the sky here, so it's not quite as dark. In fact, I can put some water in here and just let it run down the trunk of the tree. It'll bring it forward because it is in the foreground, but I don't want it to be too strong. And if I want this tree to appear as though there's some cool shadow in it, I'm going to just grab some of that strong cerulean blue and just push a little bit of that right into the wet paint. And I wish that would show up more. It's a beautiful blue color here, but I'm not really seeing it on the video screen. We'll have to experiment with that. Now it's not supposed to go down all the way here, so I'm just going to get rid of that. And if I lay my paper down a little more flat, you'll see I have it propped up on blocks here, so it tilts towards me. That way I have a little bit of control of the direction the water will run. But you can paint with it flat, just like on a flat table like this. If you're more comfortable with that, go right ahead and do that. It can form pools and lakes though, and that's challenging. You'll have to pick it up and tilt it once in a while to get that to move around. Okay, one more thing. I would like to add a little pine tree in the sunlight over here before this dries, and it's starting to dry, so I'm going to mist this with the water bottle just a touch, and I'll see if I can drop a suggestion of the shape of a pine tree. Here's another brush. It comes from Japan. It's called a hake brush, H-A-K-E. It looks like the word hake, H-A-K-E, but hake is how it's pronounced. At least that's what I've heard. And if you fray the edges of it and use your paint fairly thick, mix a yellow with a blue, you'll get a green. You can create this kind of a shape of a pine tree. See if we can get this to work here. I'm using a little bit of quinacridone gold. I might switch over to a bit of raw sienna. There we go, and a touch of French ultramarine. And we have a tree in our area called the white pine. And it's a big, majestic tree. It has a very characteristic shape that's asymmetrical. And I'm going to suggest that here is a white pine tree that is tucked into the brush right here, the trees in the forest, just a bit, like so.
Is there a chance that you can put the camera at a different angle so we can see what you're doing? What right now I'm just getting your hand.
Oh, is my hand covering that up as I was painting? Oh, sure it was. Yes. So let me just imitate what I just did.
Thank you.
In fact, I won't imitate it. I'll add a second pine tree right here. So you can see. I'm using some French ultramarine blue, a touch of quinacridone gold to make kind of a yellowish green, because I want this pine tree to appear like it's in the sunlight. And then I'm going to just kind of go back and forth in a shape like this, not that exaggerated, but to create the suggestion of the shape of those branches as they kind of open up downward from top to bottom. So that'll be the top of this little tree. And we won't paint over everything. We want it to look like it's tucked into the rest of the warm sunlit brush and weeds there. And there's another little tree emerging out of that point. It's kind of fun. Okay. All right. So at this stage, I'm going to add a couple more branches to this tree here, and then I'm going to dry this. So I'll mix up a deeper dark value. A branch there. This pine tree was actually dead, but I think I'm going to add some pine boughs to it, some branches to it, so it looks like it has a little more life. I think that'll be helpful for the painting. There's some dead branches down here. They kind of blur into the background. So while those branches are a little bit wet, let's mix up a color, a deep color. This probably gets into our number 3 value now of the pine needles themselves, the little pine boughs. And we don't paint every one of them. We're just going to generally paint, arms in the way again. We're generally going to paint a few shapes, leave space in between so it looks like the sky shows through. And it can overlap the trunk of your tree in a couple spots. We'll make a more three-dimensional appearance. Like so. We can always add more of those later. So if you're not sure, I'd say stop. And then we'll just wait till later. Okay, so there we have, let's put a branch out here. And a tree there. I was thinking in my sketch of putting a snow-covered spruce tree right here. And so this might be a good time to begin to set that in there because it's a little bit wet here yet. So let's try suggesting that. And I will have to, we'll finish that after it's dry. But this tree will, there's a little tree. I took a separate picture of this, so I had a reference of it. Not all the branches were showing because there was so much snow on it.
Excuse me?
Yes.
Yes, hi. So I'm sorry, I'm a little behind. I am at the spot where we have covered the background with the lightest color and covered the background again with the light blue color. Is that right step that I have taken? That we have to cover the background again with kind of a light blue color?
Let's see. I'm not quite sure what you're asking there. So we have to.
This is my I have just am drawing the background again with the bluish color. Is that correct? Step. The second layer of in the painting.
Yes, that's the second thing we did. Is the background color here,
Yeah.
and then we connected all that together through the shadows, all the blues.
Right.
You have more blue in the background, and you add more yellows and reds as you come forward.
Right. Okay. So more the blue will have some wet areas, which will be the dark areas, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, so I'm going to dry this now. There's more I could have done over here, but it's a little bit too dry now to work that. So we'll just work that after, we'll have to re-wet it and work that. Okay, I've got it mostly dry behind the birch trees where I'm going to work here. Oh, it's not quite dry enough there. And so what I want to do is before I move to the actual birch trees, I want to make sure I have the background behind them dark enough. And I was going to put another tree, a pine tree, right behind these birch trees so I can have a reason to build up the darks there, which will make the sunlight look even brighter on the birch trees once we are finished. And that's really what I want to have happen. I want my greatest contrasts to be right here, the greatest lights and darks next to each other. So that's what I will do now. So to put a pine tree back here, I usually start with the branches of the pine tree, paint them in, and then I connect the trunk of the tree in after the branches are in and the branches are still wet. That way, when I bring the wet trunk up to the wet branches, it bleeds together and immediately just connects the trunk into the branches. That's what I'll try and demonstrate. It's not dry enough. I have to dry it a little more or I'm going to ruin the painting right there. Okay, now it's dry enough. I usually feel the paper with the back of my hand, and if it feels warm after I'm done drying it, you know that the moisture is mostly out of the paper. But if it feels cool, you know that it's wet right under the surface yet, and it's probably too wet to paint on. But I think we're okay now. So this pine tree, the shape of it, the general shape of it is important, but specific details of it are definitely not important here. Because I have to keep in mind, I'm trying to highlight this tree. And anything behind that tree is just meant to give support to the main focal point of this painting. So I want it dark. We're now moving to our number 3 values. I'll go between 2 and 3 here with this stage. So a good combination of colors is French ultramarine and raw umber for a winter pine tree green. It hardly looks green, it looks kind of muddy, but it seems to work well to create the appearance of that green. All right, so let's see, my hand is in the way again. I'm glad somebody told me that because I get focused on the painting and I forget to look at the video. Hold this up. And we're painting on dry paper here. And these wet areas are not going to stay wet very long, so we don't have a lot of time to work with them. I do not want to create one solid dark area here. It will overweight the painting to the left side so much that it will be unattractive to look at. I just need enough dark here to set off the birch tree and to give a little balance to this dark over here. Okay, so don't want it to be too busy. I may pick up my spray bottle and just add a little mist of water to it to slightly soften it. Now, some of you that have painted watercolor before, you might be wondering about using masking fluid to cover over your birch trees. And that is definitely, you could paint over these with a mask and then paint the background and then peel the mask off and you'll have a nice white tree to work with. That's another good way to do that. Works just fine, but some people refuse to use mask or don't like to use it. The more I paint, the less I use it because I think the tree looks like it fits into the environment better if you haven't masked it out and it's this rigid shape then that you have to deal with. All right, so we've got the general shape here. Maybe there's some branches down there. It really looks kind of like a mess that we've added in here, but your eye won't even notice that once you get the birch tree in here. It's there to support the tree. So while this is still wet, I've got to set this down for a second. Let me put a trunk here. I'll just use some of that same green color. I'm going to add a little bit of burnt sienna to it, just so it's a little bit warmer. And drop that in just intermittently here where I think it would be showing through, perhaps.
All that dark color you have is burnt sienna.
For the trunk? of the tree.
Just before that, the dark that you put on your dark value.
For the pine branches, that's French ultramarine blue mixed with raw umber.
All right, thank you.
Yes. And see now, while this branch comes up here, you hardly need to do anything more to it. But if you want, where there's a little gap, you can add the suggestion of branches going outward, and it will make it look like that tree is three-dimensional, different angles. These branches are holding up the pine boughs, and it creates the illusion of a three-dimensional tree just behind your birch tree. And that's about all you need for that. Now, with a few extra trunks of trees in here that are different widths, you can make it appear as though there are multiple pine trees that are connected to all of these boughs up above, like so. And now you have a whole forest and you didn't paint very many trees. I'll suggest a few branches there, and that'll do the trick, just like that. Okay. So then in the front of my mind, I'm thinking, is it dark enough behind my trees here yet for them to really stand out? And I could add more dark after I'm done with the trees, but I like to get it done ahead of time if possible. And I think I want to darken some reflections from the landscape behind here in the water before I move to painting the birch trees. So let's take a bluish gray color, and we're going to go over this dry paper and dry color. It's called glazing. You just glaze over that with a color that, another property is transparency. Usually I choose a transparent color, and it will allow the colors underneath to show through what you're going over it with. French ultramarine is transparent, cobalt blue is for your blues. And I'm using just a mixture of those here. Like this. Just comes straight down. And you can see how that's already brought the birch trees forward by darkening the background. We could even clean up an edge here of this snowdrift by making it more defined, at least in one spot there. And then I'm just going to rinse and soften this and let it disappear. Remember I said there was this other stream that was coming in from this side over here. I'd like to have kind of this fork, this Y in the stream coming together. And so we'll try and create that with just a suggestion of some dark right there. Any questions? Okay. I don't want too much back there. We'll make it too dark. In fact, I think too dark right here. I'm going to soften and lighten this. Right there. There, that lays it down a little bit better in the distance. Okay. So now let's move to our birch trees. And we're coming close to the final stage of this painting. Sure, there's a lot more we can add in here, and we'll do some touch-ups at the end. But I want to get this done here. To paint these birch trees, the process has evolved for me over the years. And the way I started out doing it, I use a couple of flat brushes like this. In fact, I like having 3 of them ready to go. And there's 3 flats. And I moisten them a little bit. One of them needs to remain with clear water, just clear, clean water. And one of them is going to be mixed up with a shadow color, a cool color, so a lavender, a purple, a bluish gray. And the other brush will be mixed with a warm color. And I choose a warm color from the environment around which the trees are in. So raw sienna, burnt sienna, that's a great combination to use as light that's reflecting on the back side of the trees. and the shadow will be the other dark color. And that combination of cool and warm together will make the trees look very alive, and it'll make your painting seem energetic, and it will also create the illusion that the tree is round. It's a cylinder, and that's what we want to go for here. So watch what I do, and then I'll take questions as you see. So I'm mixing up a dark shadow color. Here's a French ultramarine blue, a little bit of alizarin crimson. It makes a deep dark purple. If you want to make it more gray, just grab a yellow or a brown that's on your palette, and it will start to get more gray, just like that. Now that that's mixed up, I'm going to take my other brush, and I'm going to take this wider one and mix up. We'll just take burnt sienna to keep it real simple here. Just a puddle of that. And this one's more dilute. Quite a bit of water in it. So I'll leave those two here. Then I'm going to take the brush that's clean, and I'm going to take the mist bottle and slightly mist the tree, just a little bit of moisture. And then take the brush that has water on it. I don't want it to be soaked. I'm going to get a little bit of the water off of there on a paper towel. And then just drag this over the tree where I want to paint the shadow. But don't go over the white area. You want to save the white area where your tree will be sunlit. Let me hold this up here. So I'm going to drag this over most of it. So about 3/4 of the tree is going to be slightly damp or slightly moist. And then immediately I've got to go in here, grab my shadow color, and I'm going to come down the tree about 2/3 or 3/4 of the way over from the right in this case, and create the shadow effect. And then immediately, you don't have much time on this, come back with the burnt sienna and overlap, drag that right over the purple. Down here, I'm going to save a few little marks where I'm going to have paper birch curls showing through, like so. And I'm going to grab a little more of this and try and overlap the sunlit side and just a few points also with the warm color. Like so. Now that's going to look possibly too dark. And that's the intention though. I want this pigment to stain into the fibers of the paper for just a minute or so here. And that's about long enough already. You can throw salt on here. It'll create texture on the tree. It's kind of a fun thing to do. You can do it after this. You don't have to. But I take a dry paper towel and crinkle it up so it has just a asymmetrical pattern to it. And then I go to the back side of this tree and blot off some of the paint that I've put on there. And it brings the light of the sun back as reflected light. And it really makes a fun result here. You see how the light is coming alive on that tree? Because I keep reducing the amount of area of paper that's actually light colored, the light gets stronger and stronger. So you have to add more and more dark in order to create more and more light. I'm going to let this dry, completely dry, and then I'll put the dark marks that are characteristic of a birch tree on there. Add a few branches and we'll be done. While that one's drying, I'll repeat the process on these two so you can see it 2 more times. And if you have any questions, you're welcome to ask me those questions now. Okay, I'll talk my way through. I'm going to slightly mist the tree. If you don't have a spray bottle, you don't have to mist it. You could just start with the damp brush and drag it over. Drag it right over the dry paper, but not over the white area. Switch to your shadow color. Put the shadow color on there. Kind of down the middle of the tree. Not right in the middle though, that's not very interesting. I do it 3/4 of the way over usually. Oops. And where it's light behind the tree, I put dark on both sides, both edges of the trunk. And then I switch over to the backlighting. We'll use burnt sienna, nice winter color. For summer paintings, I'll use raw sienna or yellow and permanent rose and lemon yellow or anything like that. Okay. If it's a moonlit night, I'll have light blue on the back of the trees. Okay, like so. And these birch trees, there's so much tension in their shape. They like push against each other and they turn back, and that's how you have to catch them. You don't want them straight. That is not interesting. And so the next one I'm going to put in here is going to kind of weave out and then force itself against this one, but then go back out again. Nice shape, artistic composition. So I'll blot off some of this color, not all of it, but some. Like so. There we go. I've got 2 of those put in there. And let's go to the last birch tree. And I missed it just a bit. Take the clean brush, just a little water, drag it over the paper. A little more water. Pick up the shadow color. Put that on here. And then switch over to the backlighting color. Backlighting. It's more correctly called the reflected light, I think is the actual term you'll hear. All right, overlap the purple and the violet shadow, the purple and the burnt sienna, I mean, like so. Let it soak in for just a second, and then either get a new paper towel or turn it so it's dry. A wet paper towel will put a permanent dark blot on your paper, so you don't want to do that. And then blot off some of this. I'm going to leave it pretty dark down here. I like that. It's dark against light. It's real strong in the foreground. Okay. And while this is drying, these birch trees have bark that peels off of them. It curls back, and it's usually a different color. So let's add a few little suggestions. I'm using a mixture of burnt sienna and alizarin crimson to get this kind of a birch curl look here on these. Some are right in the middle of the tree, right in the center, like that. There's one over there. You don't need too many of them, but a couple of them are kind of nice. So, okay. While that's drying, I'm going to move over here, finish this area, and then we'll come back over here and finish up the birches with the dark marks on them. And that will be our finished painting. So let's look at this little spruce tree down here. This tree, if I want it to look like it has snow over the top of it, I've only painted some of the branches. I haven't connected them together, and it already starts to look like we have bunches of snow on here in between. And that's good. The way to enhance that is to add shadow to that snow. So this time of the morning, the shadows are pretty blue yet in color. Let's just pick up a bluish kind of a value here and darken the shadow there. In just a few places, have a little bit of an accent of shadow on there. And it will start to give the illusion that it's covered in snow. Like so. that. Okay. I'm going to refer back to my value sketch for a bit. We have some shadows down there. We already have some shadow. I'm not sure if I want to do a lot more with that. We could darken at the base of the trees here a bit. I'll do a little bit of that with dry brush at the very end here. In fact, I'll just do that right now to demonstrate that. So far we've had a wash, the wet, and then we've had wet on dry. And then we've had wet in wet, where I put the wet paint into a paint that's already wet. And now we'll do a little bit of dry brush. And what that is just what it says. It's the brush is almost entirely dry, and it's just filled with thick paint. And that thick paint, then when you touch it to the paper, will come off on the raised bumps of your rough paper. It will pull the paint off on that, and it'll skip over the little valleys in the paper, it usually makes the illusion of sunlight and shadow, or that you can see through the weeds to what's behind it. So let's try a little bit here. I'll demonstrate dry brush on this sheet here. So I have really thick paint in this brush now. And if I just go across really quickly, you see how there's all those little gaps in there that show up. This is dry brush. That's exactly what it is. So I'm going to do a little bit of this. I'm going to just add some branches and brush here as dry brush. Just a few. Oh, my hand's in the way again. I'm going to switch to a different brush also. Let's just use one of these, long brush. I'm going to keep switching the color. It doesn't have to be dark. Sometimes you want a light color that you've done dry brush with, because just that variation makes it interesting. So, oh, my hand's in the way again. Let's go over here like this. A little bit here. Let's do a little dry brush. It's too wet now. A little dry brush over here. I don't really like that. Taken away from my birch trees too much. A little there. We'll suggest that there are some dried leaves in the forest here in the sunlight. A few of those. This is painting dark on light. Let's have a few more dried leaves. We'll have to make a little branch coming out of the snow to connect these. Right here, kind of going behind and in between these birches. I think that'll work nicely. I'm going to just soften this with some water so it isn't too defined here. Like that. I'm going to use dry brush to go right down the trunk of this pine tree over here to give it the look that it has bark on it. Oh, my arm's in the way again. So, just some bark. Okay, now we will come back over to our birch trees. We'll finish those off. Not before I put a little stick coming up here to connect to these. One over here too, like so. And we need a little shadow. Since we've got the stick there, let's have a shadow going out there. It's being cast in that. Okay, last step. These dark, dark marks on the birches really set them apart out in the forest. So what I do is I'll take a round brush. So this is a round. It's pointed at the top usually. If you rotate it, it's the same thickness basically all the way around. A round brush. I'll take a round and I'll mix up very, very thick paint, pure pigment. We'll just take French ultramarine, alizarin crimson, and a bit of burnt sienna. Get your brush just filled with that. It's a smaller brush here now, real thick. And then I'm going to use the brush on its side, not the point, but the side. And I'm testing it out here to show you. See, it's going to dry brush like this on the side. And if it's too wet, you'll have a solid blob like that. You don't want that. So then if it's too wet, I add more paint to it just to make it more dry and thick. And when I think I've got it like I need it to be, I will go to the tree and use the roughness of the paper to my advantage. I'm going to lay the brush down. We'll start at the bottom of this tree and just start adding a little bit of darkness here. We'll add a little here. The paint's real thick on the brush. A little on this one, like that. And we'll start to work our way up the tree. You see what that's already doing there? How fun that is? Can you see that? So let's continue to work our way up. Now you don't want to cover your tree with this because the tree will look like it's dying if there's too many of these dark marks on there. And so I go at the bottom, I loop it like down and then back up. And as I go up the tree, you're going to be going almost straight across to create the illusion that it's round. And then when you get to the top, you're going to want to go up and over and then back down like this. And that will give the illusion that the tree is round. Did you see that? So down and then back up, straight across, up and over. We'll touch these here with a little bit. And a little bit on this one. Kelsey can use my phone too. And a few up here, like so. And then what you have to do is get the characteristic upside down V shape in there on a few of them. And what that will do is it will really signify it's a birch tree, the white birch or paper birch, whatever you choose to call it. And so I keep the brush on the side again, and I have to decide where I want a few of these. Let's turn this one into one of those. We'll just lay this down like that. It's where a branch once was, and then it fell off as the tree was growing. We'll have one here kind of coming around the side of the tree like that. Let's turn this into one here. Right there, like that. It's probably enough there. You don't want them to look too even. Let's put a small one right here to break up. It's just like a ladder. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's break this even ladder up and put one right there, like that. And you see how that dark really makes the sunlight come alive. That contrast now is really set against each other, brings the tree to life. Let's do a few of these on the other trees. We'll add a couple of branches to the trees. And then we'll be done. Like so, okay. Now I'm going to take this long skinny brush again here, get some dark paint in there, and add just a few branches. I can use the paint I was just using for these marks. And it's important to study the shape of the branches of the tree that you're painting, because each species of tree will have a different characteristic shape in the way in which the branches come off the tree. And you want to try and imitate that. You want some branches to go behind or in front of the other trees, depending on where they're placed here. So like this tree is farther back than this one. So up here, I'm having these branches, some of them go behind this tree, and that helps add to that illusion of depth. And so a branch or two in here. Let's have a branch that's coming out here. It's not from the tree, but maybe from things around it on the ground. And it will go right across into the stream. And that will help create more atmospheric depth, that this is farther in front of the stream than you maybe even thought. I'll just darken that a little bit here, like so. And a couple up here. Oh, it's a little high up. Maybe something over there, like that. A couple of them over here. Like so. And I think we're about there. The temptation is to do too many of these, and then you really start to ruin your picture. But there's another plant called a dogwood, red osier dogwood, and its bark turns bright red in the winter. So I like to, and it's a native plant to the northern boreal forest. At least varieties of it are. And so I like to include that in here sometimes if I'm looking for a red color to be a complement to a green, since they're on the opposite sides of the color wheel. We haven't talked a lot about that. But using opposites of the color wheel also gives life and vibrancy to your painting. So reds and greens, purples and yellows, blues and oranges. So we've got a lot of blue in here with a lot of orange and rust color. That is a complementary color pattern that brings a scene like this to life. So there we have it, the finished painting. And I welcome any questions that you might have.
Feel free to type them in or to unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Paul,
Yes.
have you ever considered just doing a workshop on techniques on how to paint each kind of tree?
Yes, I have. I'm planning on doing that. Is this Naomi?
Yes, it is.
Hi.
And follow and let us follow along and actually do some on, some paper that doesn't necessarily turn into a beautiful painting, but just the techniques.
Right. So you could just practice on scratch paper over and over. I'm planning on doing that with birch trees.
Yes, I
so
think it would be fun for you to zero in on all those different kinds of trees sometime, but just the birch would be wonderful. I'd love to try to do that.
I will do that. Be glad to. If any of you are interested in any workshops online or in person that I do, send me a message or in the chat or something so I can go back and get your email, and then I'll include you in my workshop list.
Wonderful.
This is Eldora, and I'm interested in the trees too.
Okay, thanks, Eldora.
Is it possible to send us the reference picture
Yeah, you mean this black and white one here?
or the actual photograph?
I think so. Let's see, Mike, is there a way that, do you have everybody's email who signed up? And then I could send them a photo of the finished painting, or how would that work?
Yeah, I will send out a video recording of the class itself, this whole class. Probably get that done on Monday. And then, Paul, you could send me photographs of the original photo of the value sketch and this final painting, and I could include all that in one email to everybody.
Okay.
And then I can include what is your website so people can also sign up to get on your list, Paul?
My website is paulomanfineart.com, and it's spelled paulomanfineart.com. paulomanfineart.com.
Okay, and I'll include that in the email too, but I just typed it into the chat. So you can always find out what Paul's doing there, and also I imagine sign up for his list.
That's great. Thank you.
You bet.
You're welcome. Well, I love painting, and if you ever have any questions, just send me an email. I'm glad to help. And I hope to paint with you again sometime.
Oh, we have one question here I didn't see, Paul. Dry brush rounds at the end equals what number?
what number of a round brush.
Yeah, I think so.
You can use any brush for dry brush. It doesn't, but what I used at the end here, I don't even know what number. It was a number 12 is what I was using. It just depends on what you're going for. I was going for these thin little branches in this. For the dry brush on the birch tree, I was using the side of a brush, and that was, the number's worn off. It must be about a number 6 or 8. But if you're doing a really tiny painting, just use a little round brush. And if you're doing a big painting, use a bigger brush. So my rule of thumb is always use the biggest brush I can possibly use at any stage until I can't use it anymore. And then I switch to the next smaller one.
Mr. Oman, I just want to thank you and Mike for putting this together. I have several families that I bought tickets for of my grandkids who are doing homeschooling. So today was a painting day for them. So I thank you.
Perfect. I love to hear that.
It was really great to see, you know, some children painting along, and
I sure would. And if anyone is interested in purchasing the demonstration, I usually get a question or two about that. Just please send me an email and let me know, and I will give you the information on that.
Thank you.
great.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, folks, thank you very much for joining us. It's been a fun morning, and what a lovely painting, Paul. People are putting their appreciations in the chat box too. Paul, do you have anything else you'd like to say?
I think I've covered it. Just thank you to everyone. Thank you so much. Keep painting. Don't get too frustrated.
Thank you.
You're
Thank you,
welcome.
everybody. Take good care.
Thanks. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You're very welcome. Thanks for joining us.